Okay, so we are week 4, which is starting with functions. And functions are something that we're going to be talking about the rest of the term. So this is pretty much starting with everything. We're going to be using the same terms going forward. This is the real, I don't know, it's not really, I don't know, the meat of the class, I guess, is what I'm looking for, is functions. That's what college algebra is all about. So we're going to be finishing chapter 2 because we already looked at 2.1 when we were talking about graphing linear equations in week 2. So now we're going to look at the rest of chapter 2 because that's actually where the talk of functions starts. 2.1 doesn't have anything to do with functions, so I don't know why they stuck it in there. So we're going to be reading about functions. We're going to be analyzing graphs of functions, and I have a live session on the graphs of functions on Friday, I believe, at 2 o'clock again. There's a library of parent functions, so that's all about the different types of equations and what they look like, so that you can recognize them in form and then also visually. They all have very distinct looking graphs. Then we've got transformations of functions, which is how you can make changes to the function and what it does to the graph. Then there's combinations of functions, and that actually, the composite function part of that is a concept used a lot in programming. And then we have inverse functions. So if you took MA104, this was like the last week of class. You learned some of the basics of functions and like the definitions, but that's about as far as you went. So this is where we're really going to get into what functions are and how they show up in real life, and just understanding all of the concepts and the definitions from this week will help you going forward. And there's going to be a lot of concepts, so you really want to focus on that. So a function is basically an input and an output relationship. You plug something in and out pops some result. So that's pretty much everything in life. I mean, a lot of things with business, you're like, okay, what happens if I change this aspect of our business? What's the result? So anything where you're basically looking to see what happens after you change something, that's can be thought of as a function. Computer science, you basically, when you program, you write functions. So computer science is like based off of this mathematical concept. Engineering has a lot of things with functions. A lot of formulas we use are functions. Economics and banking, those are kind of related to business applications too, where it's like you do something, out pops something else. So even if you don't use the concept with like a math equation or with numbers, just any cause and effect relationship or any kind of relationship at all can be thought of as a function. And so there's a lot of things in real life that are not math related but can still be functions. So this really does apply to everything. So there are 6 sections this week, but luckily there's a lot of graphing in them, which you can do with Desmos. So that's going to make things go quicker. So you're going to be doing a lot of graphing. Again, you're going to be doing factoring, as we always do, and then a lot of solving linear equations, solving for x. So you're going to see the same skills pop up, and we're just applying them in different situations. So you have your discussion this week, and the discussion this week is going to be another math-based one. Then you have your ungraded practice assignment, the assignment, and then the midterm. So midterm, I'm assuming that's why you guys are all here. You want to find out what you need to know for the midterm, because it is a big part of your grade. So it's, I believe it's let's see, it's 15%. So it is a chunk. So we will go over that. But I am going to start with the discussion first, because that's usually the first thing that people do. So here's basically the motivation behind our discussion this week. As I mentioned, a lot of things are input-output relationships. A lot of things in everyday life are related in some way. And so this week, we're looking at a very common type of input-output relationship. And then we're studying whether that is considered a function by our mathematical definition. Then we're going to write a model, which is basically an equation that represents that specific situation. And then we're using that equation to put in a number to say, okay, for this input, what is my output? What is my final answer, basically? So we're using the concepts from this week, but we're applying it to a very specific situation. So that situation is taking a cab or a taxi or doing a ride share. because nowadays most people use ride shares, they don't use taxis anymore, but the same concept exists. Basically, where you know, if you take, let's say, an Uber, you have a set distance that you're going, and so that would be your input, the distance that you're traveling in this Uber, and then your output would be how much it costs. That would be the result of it, is like, okay, this is now how much you owe. And so we're going to be studying that in terms of whether that's a function by our mathematical definition. How can you write an equation that can help you figure out what your cost would be before you even take the Uber, you know, and to find, you know, you can actually figure out, like Uber tells you how much it's going to cost, but you can actually verify that on your own by writing an equation and then plugging in numbers to see if it matches. So that's what we're doing. So you are going to have to show some math and show some work. So the first step is just getting information. So you need to research a company, a rideshare, or if you have a local taxi company, you can find out their rates. So some people have called up, like if there's a taxi company, they will call the company and say, hey, how much do you charge as a flat rate? Do you have any fees? How much do you charge per mile? Do you have a per minute charge? You know, to get all that information, because you need that to create your equation. If you're doing Uber or Lyft, it's sometimes the app will tell you, but not always, and sometimes their websites will tell you and not always. So that one's a little trickier to find. You know, they're constantly updating their apps. One time I got the app to tell me, and then one time it wouldn't. So I'm trying to remember what my website is that I send people to. I think it's fairfinder.com. I'm going to double check. Nope. It's this will work. Okay. So I actually just put in a Google rideshare fares, and here it's telling you, like for Lyft. Lyft has a flat rate of 90 cents here. They do have a minimum, but then you want to know, okay, is it, you know, do they have a per mile charge, per you know, a per minute charge? So you can click on that, and so you can estimate your fares by picking like a starting point and a destination. But what we really want is this information right here. So this is telling us, okay, if you take Lyft, there's a 90-cent flat rate fee. There is a service fee that you have to take into account. They do charge per minute, per mile. And then you only need to worry about the minimum fare if your price comes to more than comes to less than that. But most places we don't have to worry about that. So all we really care about are these first four numbers here. And so this just came up with Lyft. You can do this easily with Lyft, and these are just average, so this is just over, you know, everywhere, but you can also find this information for your specific city if you want. Just doing a Google search, and just that first link gave me all of that. Ride Guru is another one that gives you this information. Here's Lyft's website with a fare estimate. So here's another one, what's the fare.com. So doing a Google search will help you find these values. So that's like the research part. You need to find out, you know, what the fees are, because that's how you're going to create your equation. Once you get all that information, then that's where you have to write an equation. So your equation is going to have variables. You're not plugging in any distance or anything. You're going to have maybe a variable for your distance. Like maybe you call that D, or maybe you want that to be X, or maybe you want an M for miles. If you have time, like if you have minutes, you might want a different variable. So that might be T for time, or you might use M for minutes. You want to be careful how you choose your letters. And then you need to have an output variable. You know, you're going to have an answer, a price, so maybe that's P, maybe you want to use Y. So you need to write an equation that has variables in it, inputs and outputs. So that's the first part of the math, and so you use your answers from the research. Then once you have your equation, then you plug in your numbers. You plug in like a mile, you plug in minutes, and to find out what the output is. And so ideally, you would do it from your home to another location, but some people live in a place where there is no cab or there are no ride shares. So pretend you're on vacation. Let's say you're visiting New York City. pick a hotel in New York City and go to like I don't know. So I'm trying to think of like the Empire State Building or something like that, you know. So you don't have to do it towards your home, but you want to, and so you can pick another city if you want. This is a little more open-ended, but you're just going to see, well, how much would this cost? And this is really cool. Or I like this discussion because when I lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I had a friend who didn't have a car, so she had to take a taxi everywhere. And so you can use this and figure out, well, how much would it cost me to take a taxi every single day to and from work? And then you think, is that cheaper than having a car, not like in a car payment? For her, it was cheaper than having a car payment. So this is one way that this could be useful in your real life if you're trying to decide if it's worth buying a car or getting a new car, if your car broke down, and that sort of thing. So that's the math portion. And then at the end, this is where you're going to take the concepts from this week and apply them. So basically, we're learning about functions. So is your equation, does that fit the mathematical definition of a function? Why or why not? Which of the equations we're looking at in 2.4, does your equation look like the most, you know, in form? Does it look like, does it have an absolute value? Does it have a square root? Which of those does it seem to look closest to? And then did you have to do any transformations? So transformations is 2.5, and that's where you like multiply your equation by something, or you add a number to your equation. So what kind of things do you have to do to your equation to take maybe what it looks like, the parent function it looks like, which is like our most basic type of equation, and then to transform it, you're multiplying and adding to that to get to your equation, basically. So that's the reflection part, is actually then taking the concepts and applying that. So the way that this should be laid out is, first, give us an introduction in words. Don't just show us math. Tell us, you know, which, is it a taxi company? Is it a ride share? Which one? What's the name of it? Where is this place? Is it a local one? Did you use the averages? Did you look up a different city? Share those numbers that you found. So you are going to have some words here, not just math, but at least give us some background information so we know the context of all your numbers. Then you give us the equation. Then you show the work to find the cost. Make sure you show all of that. I know a lot of people have been attaching files to their discussions, and I would prefer that you don't, because it's really, you have to download the file and it's a lot harder to look at it. So I'm going to just pull up and I'm going to just open up one of our sections and then just hit discussions, because the discussions do allow you to type math, and I would prefer that you do that. So I'm going to just make a pretend discussion here. So when you open up to write your discussion, so Word does not copy in, so you have to type. So if you don't see all of these options, it might just look like this. If you hit this little down arrow thing, you'll get more options. And this button next to mashups is your math editor. So if you click there, that's how I want you to type your math, so that you don't have to attach a file, and make it a lot easier for people to follow and read. And we're not constantly opening up files, downloading it, trying to figure out where that's saved on our computer, that sort of thing. So that will open up this, and then you can just start typing in your letters. It allows you to do fractions, square roots. There's more options. There's the dot for multiplication here. You're not going to need any of these things. No. This gives you a little bit more options. You can do exponents through here. It has a box, so then you type in, like if I put that button and then I type in my box and then move the arrow to each one, so that's how you can do exponents. If you want parentheses, that's here. This is absolute values. But you really, mostly what you're going to need is just on this first tab. That's the basics that you need, and then you can just type in, and then you type in your equation, then hit accept, and then it'll be right there. And then you can type words right after it, explaining it, and then you hit enter. and then you would do it again for your next line. If you try to do it all at once, sometimes the formatting gets messed up. So you do have to do it with each line, but that means people don't have to download files all the time. So I would prefer that this is the method that you use to show your work, because it's just a lot easier for people reading your discussions. And you're more likely to get more responses too if people don't have to download work. So that's how I want you to show your work. So you're going to do that, and then at the very end, you're going to reflect with those questions on the previous slide, the reflection part. And then when you're replying, you want to compare how is their equation different from your equation that you created, and talk about the differences. And then use their equation with your distance and see, okay, if this is what their equation was for, say, traveling to work, how much would it cost you to travel to work if you lived in that same area and you had the same distance or something? So that's what you're going to be doing for your replies. So are there any questions on the discussion and what you're doing for the discussion, or kind of the expectations?
No.
Good deal. I know, like, every time it's so hard, like when I read the discussion prompt, and it's so hard to kind of explain it without it looking like a big giant mess. So that's why I'm like, well, if I break this down into pieces, at least you guys have this.
Right.
Okay, so moving on to the assignment. So you guys should be in the groove. We've got our ungraded practice assignment. Don't forget that you can find the worked out solutions on Calc Chat, which is on the textbook's website. So you can always see how an odd number problem is worked out if you are struggling. Your week 4 assignment, you guys should be used to that by now. You can resubmit, so you can always have the opportunity to improve your score by resubmitting based off of the feedback. And now let's talk about this midterm. So, okay, so the midterm is basically double a quiz. So a quiz is 10 questions. The midterm has 20 questions. But because it has more questions, you have more time. So you have 2 hours for the midterm. Just like a quiz, as soon as you start it, the time starts counting down. And you need to just work on it as soon as you open it up. So the best thing when you have timed things like this is to do the questions that you know how to do those first. Do the easy ones. Get those out of the way. When you're writing your work on paper, number your questions. So that way, if your work's out of order, you at least still have it numbered. So that way you can tell which work goes with which question. Once you've done all the easy ones, then go back to the other ones that you weren't sure about and work on those. Everything is open books, so you can use your textbook, you can use your notes. So if you have those nearby and organized, that will make it easier for you. You can use your old assignments and your feedback on that. That's allowed as well. But try to do all the easy ones first. And don't worry about the time, but if you're worried about the time, what you can do is set a timer on your phone. So you have 2 hours, so I would maybe set a timer on your phone for 1.5 hours. And when that timer goes off, that tells you have half an hour, and that can let you evaluate where you're at. And if you need to just, say, okay, well, let's say I have 6 questions left in these, you can at least take a glance at them, try to make educated guesses, and then work throughout. So at least you have them all answered. You should have plenty of time to do the midterm, provided that you have taken the time to study for it, which means doing lots of practice problems. That's when I talk to people and they're saying they're running out of time, what usually happens is they are rushing, and so they make an error and they can't find it, so then they redo the problem, and then they make another error because they're rushing, and so they waste a lot of time redoing a problem, when if you do it slowly, you take your time, you're less likely to make those mistakes, and you'd actually save yourself time than if you try to rush through. So that's one of the things that people do when they run out of time, is because they were redoing a problem multiple times. because they made a small error. And if that happens and you find yourself, oh man, I can't find my error, make a guess, move on, and then come back to it later. Don't end up spending like 20 minutes on one problem. The other thing that I see a lot of people is that they just don't study. They think I'm just going to go into it blind, but you do have to do some studying to make sure that you know the material and and that you know where all your notes are and you can find things easily. You know what the questions are asking, that sort of thing. So those are my tips for doing timed exams, especially a midterm where it's going to be longer and there's more pressure. So once you've done the midterm, you've answered all of the questions, then you should have all your work on paper, so submit that to the Dropbox. If you don't, you will get a penalty on your midterm, but that penalty is removed once you submit your work and your work is looked at. So that penalty is kind of like a scare tactic to be like, look, you're supposed to be submitting this work, so you better do so. But once you submit your work, that penalty will be removed, and then you get partial credit. Michael has a question. What was that site calc math? Do you mean for the graphing or for the discussion? Or do you mean for the studying? There's lots of actually, so I could type them all in the, so the graphing website is desmos.com. I'll type that into the chat box. For studying, I like ixl.com. There is a daily limit on how many problems you can do free, but that is a very helpful website. For the discussion, I just Googled. So whatever I Googled came up for the discussion for the taxi stuff. Khan Academy also has practice problems, but those are harder to find. But you can also find practice problems on Khan Academy. I think it's khanacademy.org or .com. I forget which one. But those should help you studying. So back to the midterm. Yeah, so you submit your work. And then once you submit your work, you'll get partial credit. And I think the average, I was looking at the week 2 quiz, and the average amount of points that people were getting back were about like 7.5 points, which is because it's 100 points. That's 7.5 percentage points that people were getting boosted up on their quizzes. So that's really good. That's almost a full letter grade. So you really do. Some people actually, they got like 20 extra points, So depending on how your work is, if you have a lot of small errors, you can get a lot of points back. So you really do want to turn in those notes or your work for the midterm and all the quizzes, because that will help your scores that will help increase them. And so then the grading for the midterm Dropbox is the same as for the quizzes. The grader will have your quiz up and then have your work up, and then they're going to be looking at them side by side, giving you points on the ones you got wrong. If you have work that's correct, it's very rare that you lose any points. It's mostly, oh, you got this one wrong, but you have most of it correct. Here's some extra points. So, and then what you see in the Dropbox score, that tells you how many points you earned, and those points were then already added onto the quiz. So your quiz score will be higher than when you first took the quiz because that was added in already. So that's how the grading of the Dropboxes go. Assignments reevaluated. So with assignments, you can resubmit an assignment, you can make corrections, and then resubmit your assignment. I do not allow resubmissions of quizzes and like the exams though. So that's only for the assignments, the 10-question assignments that you're doing each week. And if you have questions about the feedback, you can always email me and then I can take a look at it. I know sometimes the graders, their feedback isn't exactly clear and it has to go through some interpreting. So sometimes I just have to reword it, or sometimes it's like, okay, well, we have to delve into deeper what was meant here. So if you do have problems understanding the feedback, let me know. Are there any other questions on just how the midterm is graded and like how it's supposed to go before I move on to the kind of topics that I would be covering? Colleen, you have trouble understanding the feedback. Yes, definitely let me know. And I know, Colleen, you sent me an email earlier. I have not read it yet, but it's in my, I know I will get to it. There are a few other people that have emailed me and been like, I don't understand this feedback, so let me know and I can translate it. I can be, I'm your translator from the grader to me. So. Okay, so since I don't see any other questions about the format of the midterm, here are the topics. So our midterm is covering the first 3 weeks. So everything you're learning this week, don't worry, it's not on the midterm. So I know a lot of people struggle with the concept of functions, so don't worry, it's not on the midterm. Your exam is covering the first 3 weeks, everything that you've gotten feedback on so far. So you've got order of operations, which is like one question of each of these topics, essentially. So, and it's going to closely follow the same type of questions that were on the quizzes and same type of things that are on the assignment. And yes, Michael, this recording will be available later. Probably what's going to happen is when I get off of here, I hear that the roads are getting bad, so I might go home. Once I'm at home, then I'll put the recording and I'll send it out and put it in the classroom and all that stuff. So that will be available. I know some people are having some trouble with the connection right now. So yeah, we've got this list. It's basically a question on each of these things. So that will help you study because it's telling you exactly, oh, you have to simplify rational expressions. So go to the rational expressions section, just P.5, look for simplifying problems. Look for problems that have the word simple to help you study. I do want to explain these, solve two of the following things. So last week we went over tons of different types of equations, and there was a lot of them, but you're not going to be tested on all of them. It's going to randomly pick 2 for you from each of these categories. So there's the solving ones that are equations, polynomial equations, rational equations, radical equations, and absolute value. So you're going to get 2 of those randomly that you would then have to solve. And it's completely random, so you might end up with 2 of the same type, or you may end up with 2 different types. But those are randomly selected. And then the same thing with the inequalities. There's basically 4 different types of inequalities that we looked at, and you're going to get 2 of them randomly. So you do need to know how to do all 4, but you don't have to show work for all 4 because some of them can be kind of lengthy. So you're only going to need 2 of those. And you're welcome to use Desmos.com for the graphing questions. And I think that's basically everything you need to know about the topics covered. I have gone through and analyzed previous scores. And so I looked at what the 5 hardest topics, the ones that people struggle the most on, so that I can kind of warn you that those tend to be the hardest ones, so you can spend some extra time studying those. So the writing word problems for linear equations, that's usually difficult. I'm sure you're not surprised word problems are difficult. Writing the equation of a line and slope, so I'm even telling you which section these are on, so you can spend some extra time. Simplifying rational expressions, of course, anything with fractions, those have always been hard for people. So, that's usually a little tougher for people. The translating, again, that's word problems. And then analyzing graphs and graphing, that's like finding the domain and range, finding the intercepts. Those are usually a little tricky for people as well. So I couldn't find any specific practice problems on IXL on those, but these are the 5 most difficult topics. So if you think you have a handle on the other things, these might be where you want to spend some extra time. And then studying wise, review all your past assignments and quizzes. Since the midterm is basically going to be all of Chapter P and all of Chapter 1, if you take the pre and post tests on the textbook's website, that would be a great way to help you study. You can take a look at practice problems, look at odd problems out of the book because all those answers are available. There is a cumulative review test for chapters P through 2. So if you do problems 1 through 33, that's a good way to study. So I'm actually going to bring this up. So I'm going to bring up the ebook to show you where this is. The way the ebook shows up for me is always different than it shows up for you guys. So don't worry if it's doing weird things. Okay. So the review test is at the end of chapter 2. So you click on chapter 2 here. And it's just randomly put me wherever I last was in chapter 2. So I'm going to click on chapter contents. Then when I'm going to scroll down, and we want this cumulative test for chapters P through 2. So that's going to be chapters P1 and 2. And then there are answers for every single one of these. So this is a good way to study, and then it has a link to CalcChat so you can review the solutions. And so I would do problems 1 through 33 because that is everything that is covered. 34 starts the rest of chapter 2 that we have not done. So do problems 1 through 33. And I would time yourself just so you can see how long this takes you. This is more problems than you will have on the midterm, so that you can kind of figure out, well, if it took me this much for 33 problems, take your total time in minutes divided by 33, figure out how much time you spent per problem and average, and that can give you an idea of how much it would take you for the midterm and whether you need to study more. So I think this is a good way to study and at least get an idea where you're at, because these are the types of questions you're going to be asked. And some of these are, you know, going to be a little different than what you may see, but it gives you a good idea of what you're going to see. So are there any questions on studying for this midterm? Okay, so of course, you know, you can always watch this again to refresh your mind on what's expected. Let's take a look at this adjusted schedule. Oops. Okay. So I have broken down the discussion so that you can do like the research and get all of your information one day, then do the math another day. You should be able to, you can actually do the entire discussion pretty quickly. Once you go through 2.4, you have enough information. You do need a little bit of 2.5 for the reflection, but for the most part, you can do most of the discussion as is without having to go through most of chapter 2. But I do have it so that you take a section a day, which videos, take notes, some, you know, practice problems, and then which question on the assignment goes with each section, so that if you're struggling on, say, question 5, okay, that's in section 2.5. And then I do recommend the best way to study for the midterm is to do a little bit each day. Don't cram. So I have spread this out so that you do a little bit each day. So that's, you know, you can modify this to your own use, of course, and your own schedule. But I'm a strong advocate of doing a little bit each day rather than trying to cram. So are there any questions on anything even beyond what we've done so far? Okay. Well, I see somebody typing. No questions. Okay. I'm really glad that you guys were able to attend this at 2. I think the next one next week is going to be 5. I think I'm rotating, so the next introduction will be later. But we do have the next live will be on Friday at 2 p.m. again. So thank you guys so much. I will try to get this in the classroom as soon as possible. Once I'm done here, I'm going to look out the window, see how bad the snow is, and whether I should leave now before the roads get bad or wait. When I listened to the radio this morning, they said they did not pre-treat the roads, so I may decide to leave a little early, be home safe, and then put this in the classroom once I'm home. But thank you guys so much for joining me, and email me or contact me if you have questions, and I will see you guys later. All right. Bye. Have a great day.